We'll have to change up the vibes a little bit today. There's been so much positive news about this 2025 class, and a huge surprise. Frogs have lost their quarterback for 2025. We'll talk about all that and more next here on Locked On Horned Frogs. It's your team every day.
You are Locked On Horned Frogs, your daily podcast on the TCU Horned Frogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Locked On Horned Frogs, your team every day. I'm your host, Steven Simcox. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. You can also find us on your favorite podcast platform. Happy July 4th Eve. Well, some of you might be listening to this on the 4th, but I'm posting it on July 3rd. And literally minutes ago, we had some breaking news. I was actually getting ready to talk about Ty Hawkins today because news came down that he would be transferring to IMG Academy for his senior season. Quarterback from San Antonio. He's moving on to IMG Academy. He's going to play a senior season there. And so I was going to touch on that and just what it meant for TCU. I thought it was an intriguing move. My first thought is just like how much playing time is he going to get there because there's so many great players at IMG Academy. But I would assume if he's making that move, then he expects to be on the field and be their starter. And then news came down today that he is decommitted from TCU and flipped his commitment across the Metroplex to SMU. And there have been some murmurs about this. Ty went on a visit to SMU. That was confirmed. He has some family ties there. His sister goes there or went there. I'm not sure if she's still a student or if she graduated. And, I mean, when he was at the IMG Academy, or not IMG Academy, when he was at the Elite 11 camp, which is premier showcase for high school QBs in the country, he talked about how he was still getting recruited. And there were TCU fans that were worried about, where he might end up. And I'm pretty shocked today. Now, it doesn't necessarily shock me that he's leaving because these things happen. I mean, I would love for him to stay at TCU, and I was optimistic that he would because, they've had a relationship with him for a long time. He committed really quickly after Kendall Briles took the job here. He was the first commit for this 2025 class. He's been very active in recruiting other people. He just took an official visit and helped them land two big names and Micah Strickland and Dane Jones. And then less than a week later, a little over a week later, he ends up leaving and committing to SMU. And I'll be honest, if he left, I didn't think it would be to Dallas. Oregon was rumored, and I think that I could see that happening. Florida was also supposedly in the mix. But I'll say this. SMU, for a long time, has lamented the fact that TCU doesn't really see them. It's a rivalry game. There's a lot of history there. Of course, TCU has famously ended the Iron Skillet battle. And I think if most SMU people, not fans, but I feel like if most SMU athletics folks were truthful, they would agree that they're also not too heartbroken that game's ending. But you know what? For years, TCU had every right to have that perspective on things because for a long time, SMU was a G5 school. They were coming back from the death penalty. They were struggling. And, yeah, they surprised TCU a couple times in the Gary Patterson era. And then they won 2 games at the end of the Gary Patterson era. And that coach who had the most success post-death penalty at SMU, he now coaches at TCU. But this is the first move they've kind of made. When they joined the ACC, big deal for them. I get that. I didn't find myself being super concerned. Just to be real about it, they paid their way in. And, hey, I give their boosters credit for putting together an organized effort to get that done. They wanted to play Power 5 football. They're committed to it. But it did sort of feel like the Lori Logden college admissions scandal where it's like, you know what, we might not be qualified for this, but we're going to make that jump. And they're still going to have to prove it on the field. They lost to Boston College last year. They lost to TCU, a bad TCU team last season, pretty handily in Fort Worth. But this is a big-time move that they made. It's not good for the Frogs. Like, we can just be real about it. About the only positive thing about it is that it's July and not December. So there's some time to start getting in somebody else's ear and say, hey, let's make this happen. And you know what? I was really positive, and I gave a lot of praise to the coaching staff and the Flying T Club after just an incredible month of June. Landing guys like, well, Chad Woodfork was at the end of July, at the end of May, but Micah Strickland recently at the end of June. I feel like they've done a really good job building this class. They've got some really good receivers. Ed Small, Dane Jones, Chance Abels. It felt like it was all building towards, what was going to be a top 25, top 30 class in the nation. And it still could be that, but this is a huge piece of the puzzle that you're losing. So the immediate fallout, and I guess the thing that TCU fans are concerned about and the coaching staff is going to have to work on now is, if Ty Hawkins was a huge part of getting other players in the fold, then you got to make sure you're, working the phones and saying, hey, stick with us. We're going to get this figured out. And then the second part of this is now you got to find a QB. And the name that everybody's going to throw around almost immediately is Adam Schobel, because his dad, Matt, and his uncle Aaron played football at TCU and went on to have careers in the NFL. John Schobel, his cousin, is committed to the Frogs as most likely an edge rusher. Right now, he's a linebacker at Columbus High School. So he's committed to Oklahoma State, and TCU hasn't been super active in his recruitment up to this point. Before that, he was committed to Baylor. I think that's a possibility. I mean, Adam, to me, from what I've watched, seems more like a pure drop back passer, which is not typically what Kendall Briles and Sonny Dykes look for in quarterbacks, like dual threat guys who can also help them in the run game. But I think, the other part of this is, and SMU's in this spot because they had Keelan Russell for a long time, and then he committed to Alabama and flipped. And so, no pun intended, but they kind of pony up here and went and made a commitment to go get Ty Hawkins. And I think that's the route TCU's going to have to go. They're going to start working on possibly poaching somebody else from another school or from a current commit to another school, because a lot of these top name QBs in the country, they've already made decisions. A lot of schools are trying to get quarterbacks locked in at the beginning of this process now, so that then they can sort of build the class around them. So this is a big loss. I mean, there's still time to figure it out and kind of make face, but this is a guy that they've had their eye on for a long time, and it felt like they've done everything they can to kind of make sure that he's there. So, yeah, it's the first time I'll genuinely say I think SMU is showing what they could be in the ACC. Like losing Jordan Hudson, and Jordan Hudson ended up having an okay season last year, had over 450 yards, 7 touchdowns, I think. But, I mean, unless he turns into like a first-round talent, I think TCU has guys on the roster who can do similar things at the receiver spot. And it feels like Sonny Dykes is always good about building a very deep receiver room. Kyron Chambers, I was hopefully going to be a really good corner for them, for the Frogs. He ends up moving on. But, end of the day, I think they have other players that can make this work. You only got one QB in the 2012 class, and you just lost him. And we've been saying for weeks now, that quarterback room is setting up really nicely for the future with Josh Huber, Haas Haney, and for a long time, you also threw Ty Hawkins in there as the next guy up, and now he's decided he's going to move on. So, yeah, pretty shocking news, and TCU's going to have to regroup and get after it. But, man, I mean, other than just maybe not being willing to match whatever he's getting from SMU, I'm not really sure how this fell apart, because TCU put together a really good recruiting class and has had a lot of momentum lately on the recruiting trail. So, I mean, no disrespect to Ty, like you got to make the decision for yourself. And I hate that they lost him, because I think he's a really good quarterback. And I mean, obviously a great talent, has a lot of tools, arm strength is there, can move around and make things happen. But now TCU's going to have to figure out where and how to pivot at that spot. But big loss for this 2025 class, and pretty wild timing given just how well they had done over the summer, making this look like it was going to be a special class moving forward. And I think it still can and will be. You just now have to go find a quarterback to take the spot. Ty Hawkins moving on to SMU. Pretty shocking development in the recruiting world. When we come back, Big 12 preseason media poll is out. Where does TCU land in that? We'll talk about that and more next year on Locked On Horned Frogs. It's your team. Unfortunately, I cannot guarantee that TCU will be able to keep blue chip recruits. But if you need tickets, man, look at this segue I'm pulling off right now. If you need tickets to a sporting event, comedy show, theater production, concert, whatever the case may be, I encourage you to download the Gametime app. Use the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 on your first purchase. You'll have a good experience with the Gametime app. I'll tell you why. First off, no hidden fees. Their fees, their company, they're going to, charge you some fees, have to. But they'll tell you what they are right up front, meaning when you click on the tickets, if it says 2 tickets is going to be $45, that's what it's going to be. It's not like you get to check out and suddenly it's $75 because they added on all these fees they didn't tell you about up front. Also, you know what the view is going to be like from your seat because there's a picture that shows you when you're sitting here, this is exactly what you're going to be looking at. Gametime app, super convenient. They have deals leading up to the event. Even when the event starts, if you want to try to sneak in by the end of the first quarter, or the case may be, you can do that with the Gametime app. They have flash deals, all kinds of sales. Gametime app, it's really easy to use. Use the promo code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Terms and conditions, as always, do apply. So, preseason Big 12 media poll is out. If you didn't know, Big 12 Media Day is in Vegas this year on July 9th. And I don't have the list in front of me right now, but Frogs that'll be represented. Josh Hoover, which I think is really encouraging that he'll be there. It kind of speaks to where he is from a recovery standpoint after missing spring practice with an injury. Namdi Abizor, I know he'll be there. And yeah, I can't remember Mike Nichols, offensive lineman, Caleb Fox, defensive lineman. I believe there's one more who I can't place in mind right now. But typically, as always is, you got veteran players who have played snaps before and are going to say all the right things. Hopefully, they're super optimistic about where TCU is. I'll tell you who's not necessarily super optimistic about where TCU is a team. It's the Big 12 media. And when you open up the Big 12 media preseason poll, first thing that's pretty crazy is that there's 16 teams, which whole new world, as we know. TCU picked to finish 10th in the conference. I'll run down quickly 1 through 16. Utah at 1. Kansas State at 2. Now, there was one vote difference, first place vote difference between Utah and Kansas State. So both those teams very close, as you would expect. Oklahoma State at 3, Kansas at 4, Arizona at 5, Iowa State at 6, West Virginia at 7, UCF at 8, Texas Tech at 9, TCU at 10, Colorado at 11, Baylor at 12, BYU at 13, Cincinnati at 14, Houston at 15, and Arizona State picked to finish last in the conference at 16. I mean, this might sound surprising. I'm not shocked by this. I think given how TCU did last season, there was a lot of optimism around what they could do, and they kind of fell flat on their face. And so usually when that happens, the media doesn't like being wrong unless it's Texas. And I know Texas won the conference last year, and they looked to be headed in the right direction. But for years, Texas had preseason hype, even though they kept disappointing people year in and year out. But for a team like TCU, I think what this shows is that right now, unfortunately, like the program's just not part of the national conversation. And I would venture to say if you did an informal poll at media days, there's not going to be a lot of media members that have a great idea of who the major players are going to be on the team this year. Now, you've got to get a amount of returning production just from a numbers perspective, but there's still a lot of questions. I think you could make the argument that TCU should be ahead of Texas Tech. I imagine that most people, when they were voting, they just simply made that decision by saying, well, Tech beat TCU last year. UCF, I mean, exciting team. I'm a bigger believer in KJ Jefferson than a lot of people, and that's going to be a big game early in the year for the Frogs where they can prove, okay, we're better than this group. But I'll say this. If TCU finishes 10th in the conference this year, then I think we're having some really hard conversations about Sonny Dykes and his coaching staff because I expect them to be better. I don't necessarily think that they're going to win the league, but the new reality with the Big 12 is I don't feel like there's a big enough talent gap that a school like TCU should be completely out of it on any given year. If they're coached up well and they're disciplined and they don't make a ton of mistakes, I feel like this is a team that should at least be in the mix for Arlington at the end of the season. Now, the teams that are ahead of them, Utah and Kansas State. Utah's got a lot of people coming back, and a lot of that's predicated on Cam Rising. What is he going to look like, and how effective is he going to be coming back from that injury? And then Kansas State, Chris Kleiman's done an outstanding job just having a consistent program that year in and year out gets the job done, and that's the reward for being at the top of the league. Oklahoma State, Ollie Gordon got into some trouble recently, but I assume he'll be back by the time conference play starts, even if there is some sort of suspension, and he's going to get the football a lot, and they're going to run the ball. And Mike Gundy did a really good job last year after they had a tough season they kind of reinvented themselves. They got back to basics. They played good defense. They ran the ball well, and they won some huge swing games in the schedule. And so TCU, that has to be their goal this upcoming season. But it's hard for me to come on here and just be mad at where they are, because I think last year they had a chance to prove critics wrong. I feel like they were a little disrespected going into the season, and then they ended up sort of proving everyone right, unfortunately, with their performance on the field. Josh Hoover should be full going once fall camp rolls around. And, I think he and this offensive line are the big keys. If they can function well and do a better job in situational football, then TCU's got a chance to get the job done. And I think we've said this a lot. This is a big year for this coaching staff, just proof of concept. And what I mean by that is for almost a decade now, well, a little less than a decade, 2014, 2015 were great seasons. But from 2016 on, there's just been these wild pendulum swings. It's like 5-7, missing a bowl game. They had a 6-6 year sprinkled in there. But 2017 team was great, won double-digit games. 2020 they kind of closed the season strong, and the record I think ended up looking better than the talent suggested. And of course, in 2022 they had that outstanding run. But the in between, the lows have been low, and whether it's because of young quarterback play, struggling on the offensive line, the defense having issues, there's a lot of reasons for it. But TCU has to show the country and college football population at large that they can be a team that's consistently making bowl games again, being in the hunt for a conference title. And the first step in doing that is by winning 8 to 10 games this year. And I think that's doable. It's plausible. It starts with winning your non-conference games, and that SMU game now is going to be a lot of fun. I mean, there was already the juice of Sonny Dykes leaving, and that's part of it. I'm sure the fans in Dallas will not greet him kindly. And then now he won't be on the field, but the Ty Hawkins flip definitely adds to the intrigue of what this rivalry can be. When we come back, we'll wrap things up, get some audience reaction. TCU football picked 10th in the preseason poll. I think they're better than that. I feel like if they finish 10th in the league, then we're having some really difficult conversations about this program moving forward. But the great thing is we'll find out here in a few months on the field when they get it going against Stanford. We'll wrap things up next on Locked On Horned Frogs. It's your team every day. So a cool moment from the show on Monday, I posted it. It was about Micah Strickland, 4-star corner from Brownsboro. I encourage you to go check out that video if you haven't. Big recruiting win for TCU. They got it done over Texas Tech, Houston, others. Had a really big-time commitment list, as you'd expect from a blue-chip player like that. And a YouTube user, Ivan Anderson, 2001 usernames, he just said, "That's my son." And so I reached out to him on YouTube specifically, but I wanted to say congratulations to Micah Strickland and his family. I think we can get caught up in just the numbers and what's the ranking and all these things. But we're talking about guys that are living out their dreams. Like, this is really cool that, you know, him and his family put in a ton of work, a ton of sacrifice to get to this point. They know better than anybody, and there's probably things that went on behind the scenes that nobody's ever going to know about, just all the work that they had to do to get here. And he's going to play major college football, and that's awesome. And I hope that never gets lost on me, that this is just a really cool moment for these players when they make a commitment to a school or sign with a school. And yeah, a lot of time and effort and thinking went into that, right? And weighing, you know, what's the best decision and how to move forward. So I just want to say congratulations to Mike and his family. And I appreciate you guys checking out my commentary on it. And yeah, love to hear from parents. I've gotten to know a few parents of players during my time doing this. And I always try to keep in mind that these are people, and to, you know, always just be respectful when I'm talking about the team and the coaching staff and things of that nature. So it was awesome to hear from Micah's dad, and, you know, best of luck to them as they get ready for his senior season and what hopefully is a super successful one there in Texas high school football, which there's nothing better. I love Texas high school football. It's the best. But a couple other people had thoughts about this move and, you know, where TCU's going. Jacob said, I think Josh is the guy for 2024, talking about Josh Hoover, and then we'll see how he does this year. And after that, who knows, but he's excited for the team. I am too. And yeah, big changes now with Ty Hawkins moving on. We'll kind of see where they go next. But I agree with you. I think Josh Hoover is the dude this season. He's got a great chance to show, you know, where he is and what he can do in year 2 under Kendall Briles. Doug says the 2025 class looks amazing. Hopefully these commits will stick with their commitment to TCU. Yep. And you know, that's the tough thing. When you land big name players who can play at a high level, then the next step is you got to get them to signing day. And, you know, in this case, they lose out on one of those guys, but that happens. That's part of it. And then Big Easy, who's a frequent listener and YouTube watcher, said hopefully they'll stick it out until signing day. And that was the beginning of the show, is that they weren't able to hold on to one of those guys. But there's still a long time until December, so we'll see where the coaching staff goes. And I mean, it will be kind of exciting to see what type of quarterback they go after next and who the next in line could be. We'll be back on Friday. It's Locked On Horned Frogs. It's your team. We do it here every day.